All right, guys, today's online lesson is our two of our poets for this unit, starting with William Cullen Bryant. And both of these guys, the pictures I have, look like very kindly grandfathers. Um, so, kind of a neat commonality they share. But Bryant lived from 1794 to 1878, so he lived a good long life. He was born in rural New England, Massachusetts. Kind of a tough thing with his family growing up. Um, Financially, they weren't very well off. His dad really wanted to be able to send him to college, but he wasn't able to stay there long. So Bryant, from the beginning, worked and provided for himself from a pretty young age and was able to find jobs doing what he enjoyed doing, which was writing and editing. So he did work as a newspaper editor for many years. As an author, he was influenced by the British Romantic poets, which you've probably heard of Wordsworth before, or Shelley or Keats. And so he read a lot of their poetry, but especially Wordsworth. He's also known as a nature poet. And we think of William Cullen Bryant as one of our nature poets of American literature. He also, a little, not later in life, but after a period of work, was able to put himself through law school and become a lawyer. And so that was something that was able to earn him some financial success and support his career as a poet and author. He was also very politically active. He was anti-slavery, so he was involved in writing and just any way he could to support the anti-slavery movement at this time period. But the main thing that, again, this goes along with his influence of the British Romantic poets, is that he was known as a nature poet. All of his poetry shows his love of nature, which is obviously a hallmark of Romanticism, and that's what qualifies him to be one of our classic Romantic poets. So go ahead and open your book up to page 123. And the first poem we're going to look at, we're looking at two, is called Thanatopsis, which is kind of a weird word. And the word Thanatopsis, if you take it apart, literally means to see death or seeing death. So if you read this poem last week when it was assigned, it's a little depressing because it is all about death and how after we die we go down into the earth and tree roots pierce our mold, and so it's a little bit of a downer. But his attitude towards death is kind of the idea that we're all going back to nature and it's just part of the circle of life type thing. So let's look at this poem a little more closely. The first thing I want you to notice is how Bryant personifies nature. He uses personification a lot. All right, so let me read a little bit. Page 123. To him who in the love of nature holds communion with her visible forms, she speaks a various language. All right, his poetry is a little hard to read, so I'm going to try and translate for you a little bit. So basically, he who loves nature and communes with nature, all right, nature will speak to him, right? She speaks a various language. For his gayer hours, she has a voice of gladness and a smile and eloquence of beauty. All right, so if you're happy, then nature smiles at you. Into his darker musings, with a mild and gentle sympathy that steals away their sharpness ere he is aware. So when you are sad, then nature can soften that sadness a little bit. So he personifies nature almost as like your own personal therapist that's going to help you deal with all your different emotions. And so then he takes it up a notch. So I'm at line 8 here. When thoughts of the last bitter hour come like a blight over thy spirit, and sad images of the stern agony and shroud and pall and breathless darkness and the narrow house make thee to shudder. All right, so when you think about your coffin and how you're going to die, and grow sick at heart, go forth under the open sky and list, as in listen, to nature's teachings. All right, so when you're in that very hour of just utter sadness, go out and be with nature, and she's going to be this still voice to soothe your soul. And then if you skip down to it's like line 22, he says, earth that nourished thee shall claim thy growth, to be resolved to earth again, and lost each human trace. Surrendering up thine individual being, shalt thou go to mix forever with the elements, and be a brother to the insensible rock. So, like, when you die, you're going to go back to nature and death. And so this is all, it's pretty dark and kind of depressing. And he again talks about how the tree roots are going to, pierce your body, and kind of a downer. But interestingly, the tone of the poem shifts in line 30. All right, so we got darker and darker and darker, and then there's a little shift. He still stays on the topic of death, but let's look what happens here. All right, line 30. Yet, not to thy eternal resting place shalt thou retire alone, nor couldst thou wish couch more magnificent. Thou shalt lie down with patriarchs of the infant world, with kings, the powerful of the earth, the wise, the good, fair forms, and hoary seers of ages past, all in one mighty sepulchre. So, it's like Bryant saying, don't be sad. When you die, you are not alone, and we're all going to die together. And so you're going to be in good company, and our coffin, our tomb, is the earth. And who could want a better final resting place than to be buried in the earth? And so he goes on and on about this for quite a while. And I always ask my students, if we're actually able to have discussion, is it helpful or encouraging to know that everyone dies? And typically I'll get a variety of answers. In some ways it's encouraging because you're not alone in your fear of death or your anticipation or the fact that it's unknown to all of us. But in some ways it's like, well, that doesn't really make me feel better because death is still scary and death is still something that's unknown to me. So go ahead and turn to page 124. We'll look at a little bit more of what he talks about. Let's see. Look at line 57, 58. He says, so shalt thou rest. And what if thou shalt fall unnoticed by the living, and no friend take note of thy departure? So who cares if everyone forgets you after you die? All that breathe will share thy destiny. The gay will laugh when thou art gone, the solemn brood of care plod on, and each one as before will chase his favorite phantom. Yet all of these shall leave their mirth and their employments, and shall come and make their bed with thee. All right, so some people after you die are going to go on and live a happy life. Some people after you die will go on and live a sad life, but every single person will join you in death. And he talks about the long train of ages. And then let's just look at the last 5 lines. He says, thou go not like the quarry's slave at night, scourged to his dungeon, but sustained and soothed by an unfaltering trust, approach thy grave like one who wraps the drapery of his couch about him and lies down to pleasant dreams. So really, at the end of the day here, Bryant's attitude towards death seems to be fairly friendly. As far as whether or not he believes in an afterlife, that's really up to interpretation. It seems that he thinks that we all just kind of go back to earth, that there really is no heaven or hell per se. But he also seems to be that thinks that there is an eternal soul and that we will somehow live on after death. But it's not real clear how he thinks that's going to work. I don't know. But in general, this is a poem about death, and it's kind of dark. But his tone at the end it almost reminds me of, if you've taken American Lit 2, Emily Dickinson talks about death being her friend. And so he's like, don't be stressed out as you go to the grave, like you're being dragged there. It's like you're gonna just go to sleep on the couch and dream pleasant dreams. So to him, the fact that not only that in death we go back to nature, that's comforting, but in death we do not go alone. To him, that is comforting. So that's Thanatopsis. Interesting. This is actually probably his most famous poem. This is one that brought him a lot of notoriety. The other one I had you read was To a Waterfowl, right across the page here on 125. And this is just kind of a nice little nature lyric, which hopefully you can tell by the title, is addressed to a bird. So the whole poem itself is personification, well, it's apostrophe, because he's directly addressing this waterfowl, this, duck or goose or what have you, bird that lives in a lake. On a lake, I guess, not in the lake. All right, so let's look a little bit. He starts off with a question. All right, so he's talking to this bird, and he says, whither, so where, midst falling dew, while glow the heavens with the last steps of day, far through their rosy depths, dost thou pursue thy solitary way? So again, he breaks his sentences up awkwardly, but basically, where are you going, right? Where are you flying, bird? And then if you skip down to the third stanza, he says, seek'st thou the plashy brink of weedy lake, or marge of river wide, or where the rocking billows rise and sink on the chafed ocean side? So are you going to a lake or a river or the ocean? Basically like, where are you going, bird? And so he's just having a conversation with the bird, just doing his thing. And then another interesting element comes in. So in line 13, he says, there is a power, capital P power, whose care teaches thy way along that pathless coast, the desert and illimitable air, lone, wandering, but not lost. So here, and there's a lot of discussion whether or not Bryant believes in God. And he does believe in some kind of higher power. And it's interesting that he labels it, the word power instead of God, of a deity. But some sort of God is telling this bird where to go. So in a place with no path, right, the pathless coast, this power teaches him the way, where the path is. So instead of being wandering, he may be wandering, but he is not lost. So just sitting here, talking to the bird and saying like, wow, it's amazing that you know where to go. And that's a question that scientists have studied for years and years. Like, how do birds know where to migrate miles and miles and miles to get to where they need to go? And so he talks more about that. And then towards the end, he has this moment, and this is, Bryant, he has these moments in nature, and then he kind of has this little personal reflection of how it ties into him. So look at the last two stanzas. All right, line 25. Thou art gone, the abyss of heaven hath swallowed up thy form, yet on my heart deeply hath sunk the lesson thou hast given, and shall not soon depart. All right, so you've taught me something, bird. Then he says, he who from zone to zone guides through the boundless sky thy certain flight, in the long way that I must tread alone, will lead my steps aright. So again, he refers to this higher power, whether or not it's God, or sometimes I even think he's talking about nature. We don't know. But some higher power that teaches the bird where to fly. He's like, this God will keep me from being alone, and it's going to lead my steps in the right direction. So he draws comfort from the fact that this bird instinctually knows where to go, that he himself will be able to make choices that will be okay. So his soul has learned something beautiful from having this one-sided conversation with a waterfowl. So there you go. That's Bryant and his love of nature. The other poet we have read is Longfellow, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And for him, we need to turn over to page 596. 596. So he is several pages over in the book. All right, so Longfellow lived from 1807 to 1882, and he was born in Maine to an influential family. So unlike Bryant, Longfellow was born to, I wouldn't say wealth, but a family of means, a family with connections. And so he was definitely more privileged in that way. And because of that, he was able to attend college and was connected with a lot of famous people. In fact, some of his classmates at college included Nathaniel Hawthorne and Franklin Pierce, who was a president of the United States. I can't remember which number he is. So he knew some influential people. He eventually became a professor at Harvard University, so he was very well educated. He spoke multiple languages, really, really smart guy. He did travel abroad. For different reasons. Some of this was tourism, some of it was to study various things. I don't know, people had more money to travel back then, I guess. While they were traveling, at this point he was married, had just recently been married, just a few years, and his wife died of complications from a miscarriage. And so shortly after that, he returned to the United States. Something he was really famous for was his narrative poetry. And we're not reading his most famous poem or one of his most famous poems because it's very long. But like he wrote poems about the Native Americans, like Hiawatha. And it's possible that you've seen a Disney cartoon version of Hiawatha set to this poem that, again, is just very well known and very popular. So you may remember that from your childhood. He also, and I just have this on here because it's relevant to one of the poems you read, but his second wife also died, and he really, really mourned her loss. The third poem that you read is basically in remembrance of her, and it was a really tragic accident. We'll talk more about that when we get to that poem. But Longfellow, really well known and well beloved American poet, and he was well known for his poetry and made a fair amount of money doing it. So, well published. All right, the first one we're looking at, if you turn to page 598, is called A Psalm of Life. And I think you're going to see why Longfellow was so well loved, because his poetry is bright and fervent, and it has all the feels. Okay, it's going to make you feel good. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is the form of his poetry. So this poem has lots of short little stanzas, and it has a very tight rhyme scheme. Okay, and that just means he's very consistent. Like if you look at the first stanza, numbers dream, slumbers seem, earnest goal returneth soul. So it's very tight. He uses lots of very close rhymes, pure rhymes. And so let me just read a little bit out loud and let you think about how that affects the tone of the poem. All right, I'll just read the first three stanzas. Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream. For the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way, but to act, that each tomorrow find us farther than today. So as you can tell, that kind of sing-songy feel is what drives the poem forward. It gives it movement, it gives it life, it makes it intense, right? So the form is very purposeful to give this poem, like I said, it gives it rhythm and life and drive, and it just makes it feel more intense in general. All right, so what this poem is about is like what he thinks, it's a psalm of life, and so what he thinks life is about, what does he think man's highest calling is? And if you look at just those first few stanzas I've already read, he says, life is real, and the grave, it's not its goal. So we're not here just to die. He says, dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. So we have an eternal soul. Look at stanza 3. He says, not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way. So we're not here to enjoy life, nor are we here to be sad. He says, but to act, that each tomorrow find us farther than today. So what we have here is a call to action. To be alive means to be doing. To be alive means that you are moving forward, all right? You are following whatever path that has been laid in front of you, all right? I love this. Look down at stanza 5. He says, in the world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb driven cattle, be a hero in the strife. So don't be like a cow, just wandering along, eating grass. Like, get up and do something. Take action. Be a person that is accomplishing things in the world. Then that word action pops up again in the next stanza. Trust no future, however pleasant. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act in the glorious present. Heart within and God o'erhead. So again, his whole point here is that life is for doing. All right, you've heard that saying that you can sleep when you're dead. Like, that's what he was all about. He's like, we have to do what we need to do. And in the next stanza, in stanza 7, he even says, lives of great men all remind us that we can make our lives sublime. All right, so do you see that emphasis on individualism? Like this, and this is romanticism at its core. Like, be true to yourself, do what you need to do, follow your calling. And he's like, other people have done it, and that's what we need to do. Last stanza. Let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. All right, so action, action, action. So I always ask my student, how has his call to action shaped American identity? And that's so easy to answer. Now we have different words for it. We say hustle, right? Like, you gotta hustle. Or we talk about the daily grind. There are so many different cliches that you could pull out of your vocabulary, that this is part of our American identity, is to work hard, be busy, be up and doing, don't be passive. And we see this reflected really well in Longfellow's poem here. I had you read, and this is really short, which is why I assigned it, the prologue to one of his much longer poems. And I just wanted you to see like how he's famous for these long poems that told stories. And we don't have time for you to read a long poem, but I just want to get you a taste of it. And so he would paint this beautiful setting, or in this case, it's kind of more of a dark, foreboding type setting. But he would make these really involved narratives. All right, so let's talk about the setting be established here. This is on page 601. So I'll just read a few lines. This is the forest primeval, the murmuring pines and the hemlocks, bearded with moss, and in garments green, indistinct in the twilight. All right, so here we have, again, the forest primeval and this personification of nature. Let's see. Look to the next stanza. This is the forest primeval, but where are the hearts that beneath it leaped like the roe when he hears in the woodland the voice of the huntsman? Where is the thatched roof village, the home of Acadian farmers, men whose lives glided on like rivers that water the woodlands? So really we have here, he's asking questions about this kind of dark, mysterious setting. So I would say the overall tone here that Longfellow is establishing is that of mystery and intrigue. He wants to draw his readers in to this story. And it's going to be a story, it's going to be like a tragic love story about these young lovers who were getting married, and then there was this crisis in the village, like a battle, and they got separated on their wedding day. And it was kind of, it was very romantic and tragic. That's what I'm looking for. So again, he's just setting up his story. Really important there. The poem I really want to spend some more time on is The Cross of Snow. And this is over on page 607. 607. And this is the poem that was written in memory of Longfellow's second wife, to whom he was married for 18 years, a very long time. And if you look at the footnote, it talks about her tragic death. And what happened was, so she was trying to preserve some, like a lock of, I think it was their daughter's hair, with sealing wax. And I'm not exactly sure how that worked, but they would melt wax, like from a candle, to, seal a letter. And in this case, she's wanting to put this little lock of hair, I don't know, affix it to a book or put it in a locket or something. But the bottom line was she's working on this craft project with a candle, and her dress caught on fire. And it quickly was out of control and led to her death. And Longfellow was actually there and tried to put the fire out himself, and he was nearly killed in trying to put out the flames. And so if you can just imagine the emotional trauma of seeing your spouse being burned alive and trying to save her, but being unable to, being injured yourself in the process, obviously a very traumatic and dark event in his life. All right, so The Cross of Snow, let's read a little bit. And I'll let you go ahead and write this down because I want you to try to pay attention to the imagery, especially here at the beginning. All right, it's a short poem, it's just a little sonnet. In the long sleepless watches of the night, a gentle face, the face of one long dead, looks at me from the wall, where round its head the night lamp casts a halo of pale light. All right, so it's nighttime and he can't sleep. So we have the darkness contrasted with what? All right, he sees the portrait of his wife on the wall, and it looks like there's a halo around her head. So she's like his angel glowing in the dark, right? A halo of pale light. So right away we have dark and light imagery. Look at the next line, line 5. Here in this room she died. The soul more white never through martyrdom of fire was led to its repose. Nor can in books be read the legend of a life more benedict, which just means blessed. So here he talks about how the whiteness of her soul, so more light imagery, and how she was like a martyr. And obviously this idea of the martyrdom of fire is an allusion to how she died. And so you even get the idea of, to be martyred means that you were sacrificed, right? Like you had some sort of religious belief and had to die for it. So I don't know, which is just an interesting thing that he's spiritualized her death. She's painted as an angel, as a martyr. It's become this very spiritual thing. And, you can't even read about people like this in books. So he paints that image, and then he moves directly to this other image. All right, and it's a little confusing at first because it's like, whoa, he switched topics. He says, there is a mountain in the distant west that, sun-defying, in its deep ravines displays a cross of snow upon its side. Such is the cross I wear upon my breast, these 18 years, through all the changing scenes and seasons, changeless since the day she died. So, I'm going to come back to this. Let me show you guys a picture here. So there's apparently this mountain out west that in certain conditions, and if you look at your footnote, it's called the Mountain of the Holy Cross in Colorado, where the eastern face, when some of the snow melts, there's some snow still deep in the mountain that is in the shape of a cross. And so that's what he's referring to. And so, now that you've seen that picture, sorry, I can't figure this out. Let's talk about why the cross of snow is an appropriate symbol for Longfellow's grief, okay? And here I want you to think too really interestingly about the light imagery, the dark imagery, and then kind of the cold and heat imagery here, like the contrast of fire and cold, because it's really fascinating because a cross is again furthers this idea of the spirituality, the sacrifice of her death, because we have an allusion to Christ, right? Dying on the cross. And the sun, okay, it's sun defying. So even though there is warmth, the coldness of his grief cannot be penetrated. All right, it is so, so deeply carved into his soul. There will always be that coldness of his mourning and his grief, no matter how much time passes by, so that even in summer, right, even when the weather is warm, he still carries this grief around. He talks about how the cross of snow is upon his breast. And he talks about through all the changing scenes and seasons, and how it's like nothing, the world could not change since his wife died. And so a really powerful poem, really cool imagery of grief and how Longfellow felt about the death of his wife. So I hope that makes sense. Definitely let me know if you have any questions. And I hope you study hard for your test next week.